advertising in the world of decentralization will take on a different shape and form.
Web2, where we're looking at audiences, is a group of people to engage with. Mind shift in Web3 is looking at this group of people not as an audience, but as a community.
What are your objectives? What's your audience? And what is the differentiating experience that you want to create for those audiences?
The focus on creating value for your users is going to go from necessary to like absolutely imperative.
The first episode covered what the Metaverse and Web3 are. The next question is, how does marketing in this medium look? Who is the audience? What's the potential? And what steps should brands take to enter the space? Let's find answers to these questions, starting from the audience.
If you look at the decentralized world, actually, the beauty of that is that you can't even see the demographics in the same way because it's all built using these principles of decentralization.
It feels like from all of the data that we have, it's a pretty broad audience. There are so many different communities. You have the people that come more from gaming, you have the people that are building more ethos around Web3 and they're NFT and enthusiasts and so on. You have a lot of different types of people that you can design an experience for.
If you're defining the metaverse as sort of a digital ecosystem where you can express yourself through an avatar, you can look at the demographic profiles of who's using Horizon Worlds, who's using Roblox, who's using Fortnite. Fortnite skews to be more male gamers. Roblox skews to be children. I think their most average age is 9 to 13, so very much a younger audience. And Horizon Worlds a little bit across the board, but sort of skewing towards the tech-inclined male audience.
I think there's maybe a reputation in the industry that the larger metaverse platforms or platforms that you would brand as metaverse skew a little younger. The average age of a user on Minecraft, for example, is actually 24 years old, at least going on data that Microsoft has published about the platform. So I think it's fair to say the collection of platforms and experiences that make up the metaverse tends to skew a little younger. I think it certainly skews Gen Z and upcoming Gen Alpha. But I do think it's indicative of more hyper online digital behavior that we're seeing, particularly post-pandemic. The virtualization of user behavior of our culture, really, of the relationships that we have, of how we spend our day.
What are the fundamental differences between marketing in Web3 versus Web2?
What we've seen for the last decade plus was tremendous amount of scalable access to information, tremendous amount of digital communication, tremendous amount of social presence being built up by these Web2 giants, and people spending tremendous amounts of time on their cell phones, on their laptops, engaging digitally. What we also saw was all that value really accrued to the duopoly and to the main tech giants who were leveraging an ad-supported model to fuel this free digital ecosystem. Where I think Web3 comes in is right-sizing the economics of the internet. So instead of all of that value that's created going to the companies who are the platforms powering it, it actually goes more equitably to the creators, to the collectors, to the participants, and of course also to the companies who are powering it. So I think marketing in Web3 has to understand that as a fundamental difference.
Marketers can't think of Web3 as a congregate of audiences. They have to think of it as distinct individual communities, right? These are self-governed, sometimes multi-billion-dollar value communities, and I'm speaking particularly around DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations. Brands cannot extract value from these communities. They have to add value to these communities. And that's a huge mind shift.
What steps can brands take to create a sustainable strategy in the metaverse?
The first thing that brands need to do is really get educated on what the ecosystem is and separate fact from vision. Second, they need to get themselves personally involved. I hear from a lot of CMOs and brand directors who are very interested in this, but they haven't themselves gotten a wallet, have never purchased an NFT. I think it's so important that you actually put yourself in the shoes of a consumer so you can think what would be interesting to them.
Start with the why, start with understanding and aligning very strictly on your objectives in order to get into the metaverse.
Why do you want to be part of this movement? Why do you want to be part of this ecosystem? What is the intention behind this? And if it's like, hey, we want to make a quick buck around some NFT sales, we typically push back on that and say, okay, and what happens after that? And how are you managing the community after that? And what kind of value are providing to your NFT holders after that? And then what are the partnerships and collaborations that you want to bring to the table from other communities after that, right? And so by answering maybe those questions, you can get to the germ of like, why do you really want to do this?
But also the desire to learn and not just test and learn, but aggressively learn, like an accelerated learning agenda, and be prepared to fail as well as succeed along the way.
How can brands tie back metaverse marketing strategy to the real world?
Consumers are starting to engage with and value and appreciate virtual experiences, virtual channels, virtual currencies, virtual assets, digital assets, and communities and their own sense of actually digital identity. They're starting to value those things as highly as they value their real world equivalent.
We've seen so much coming from fashion, from wearables. We've seen the whole space of digital assets being enriched so meaningfully by companies that are not just replicating their actual products in digital spaces. They're actually starting to create for the digital fashion of the future, or for the digital wearables or assets of the future.
A hot take would be that some of the best ways for brands to engage in Web3 is actually to do IRL experiences. We've seen a tremendous success for NFT programs who do meetups and who do events and experiences for their holders.
NFTs are a phenomenal way to reinvent loyalty programs, for instance, and take something that has been pretty much the same for a lot of years and turn it into a more dynamic way of engaging with your community and providing utility or providing emotional value or bragging rights.
What is the long-term potential for brands in the metaverse, and how do you measure success?
Primarily, at the moment, it's about driving engagement. It's about demonstrating a willing audience who's prepared to show up to the experience that you created and sort of engage with it and talk about it. And there's hype around it, there's buzz around it, and you can see how they're interacting with it and they're willing to feed back. And really very similar to how we measure the success of digital activations these days. Are people looking at it? Are they touching it? Are they going through the journey that we hope they're going to go through? And are they talking about it? Are they becoming advocates for the brand and for the experience?
I'm interested in also understanding, do people have different perceptions of a brand inside the metaverse as opposed to that same brand in real life? And how does that relationship actually happen? You know, we've seen a lot of like luxury brands penetrate the metaverse in ways that are very friendly. I'm not going to call it very accessible, but definitely like broader in scope than their physical real life footprint would be. That's super interesting to better understand like those relationships and that portfolio stretch.
We're still very, very early into this game. If you think about the technology adoption cycle, like we're not even to the early adopters yet. We're still to the innovators. So how can you win with those early people as you think about ways to get 2 steps ahead of where your consumers are going, so you're not playing catch up?
This presents a huge opportunity to not just recreate, but create absolutely new revenue streams, new loyalty programs, new opportunities to collaborate and make money, right? Ultimately, and build brand.
How can the metaverse impact talent strategies and internal structures and ad lands?
What we've seen is that talent tends to be ahead of leadership in this space. So inside of brands and actually inside of many agencies, there's an enormous willingness from the talent, particularly the creative talent, to engage with and understand these new spaces.
It's important for every strategy person out there to understand the basics of the metaverse. Not like it's some far remote thing that has a convoluted definition and might happen or might not happen. I think that's the wrong conversation. You need to understand it as a meaningful way to connect people.
Kind of gets to the whole idea of like a different new talent stack that is, becoming much more integral to the traditional talent stack of an agency. Now you're adding a couple more talent stacks. One is going to be a developer, right? Probably Solidity, right? Or some sort of software developer, some sort of chief product officer, because the productization is the key component to blockchain, not just a smart contract, and someone who knows how to structure a smart contract.
The commitment to the metaverse or to Web3 virtualization needs to come from leadership. Otherwise, nothing will get off the ground.
I equally believe that it's important for people inside agencies, strategies, and beyond to form strong relationships and bonds with the creator community at large, because I think one of the beauties of the metaverse, in my opinion, is that it truly democratizes creativity quite a lot. It gives us the opportunity to co-create with types of people, with types of creators, with types of idea generators that are absolutely outstanding.
One consideration would be the future of work. We just finished up a meeting that was in the metaverse, and we were whiteboarding, and I was sitting with my team. That really does help create that key human connection. Like, you can see gestures, and it can identify your facial movements, and it did feel way more immersive than just sitting on a Zoom call. So I think that's one sort of area of disruption, is the future of work. Can the metaverse bring this feeling of sharing the space with someone, even if you live across the world?
When it comes to targeting audiences and measuring success in the metaverse, to what extent do the rules need to be rewritten?
Brands are going to need to show up in the value exchange with consumers in a much more meaningful way than they have previously. The tendency on the part of brands, at least, has been to sort of pay lip service to this idea of value exchange with their consumer, where we create an engaging experience and people sort of agree to our cookie policy in order to take part in that experience, or they agree to give us their email address or something like that. I think the impetus, the onus rather, on brands to create more compelling experiences, more rewarding communities, and more participation from their users in order to elicit from their users the desire to actually engage and the desire to give them access to their data. It's going to be a harder trick for marketers to pull off in that regard.
A lot of it just comes from understanding what were some of the things that we didn't necessarily like about Web2, and trying to foster that and correct that more and more.
We've seen this movie before. When disruption happens, it happens quickly and brands get left behind.